The morning I ran, the sky was painted in deep purple, the sun finally poking its head up from behind the cairngorms. It was the first clear sky of the year, the first not hidden away by bad weather. I idly rose out of bed and haphazardly packed what I thought would be adequate camping supplies into a small backpack. I snuck into our shed to grab the old tent and sleeping bag that hadn't been touched in years. I stole the car keys to my mother's blue Fiat. I shoved everything in that tiny car, and I drove. It was an incredibly easy thing to do. I didn't leave a note. I didn't think about what any of it meant. I didn't think about the consequences. I wanted out. Self-destruction is the wrong word for it. That would imply intention, which I lacked. I was ambivalent towards everything, and I hated it. I just wanted anything but this. I used to write poetry. I lost it somewhere along the way. I had grown dispassionate. I missed whichever part of me was fluent in the language of the muse. I missed being able to pick up a pen and for the words to flow naturally like I was plucking them out of the air. I tried all sorts of ways to get back in touch. I tried to be in love, but was bad at it. I tried to lose myself in stolen booze, but couldn't hack the morning after. I tried medication, and I couldn't stand the stillness. I tried religion, and I couldn't stand the silence. Poetry, I found, came from madness, or maybe restlessness. I think I have this great gaping hole in the middle of me where poetry comes from, but in return, it wants something back, something it doesn't quite know the name of. People with pica often suffer from nutritional deficiencies. The body misses something it can't quite place, so it demands you search in all strange places. Impulse. Impulse is the small piece of glass you feel compelled to consume, that jagged rock in your palm, the saliva swelling in your mouth. It is the seeking of sensation. I want to feel alive again. This single thought was what led me over Isle of Skye, driving at 80 with just a few driving lessons under my belt and no license in the glove box. I drove with a delusional kind of confidence that I would just figure it out along the way. Fear sat like a stone in my gut, always there, always anxious about the next bend I sped round, always forcing my hands tighter around the wheel. Fear makes the heart slam violently. Fear makes you feel real. Camping also makes you feel real, especially when you haven't done it much and the rain is starting to come down ferociously in Portree and you can't quite remember how to set up your tent, which if done incorrectly will leave you and all of your kit utterly drenched by the morning. That's the funny thing about impulse. The weather is rarely sympathetic, no less than the Highlands. By 2 in the morning, accepting that I was only getting colder the longer I stayed in that tent, I dragged myself out and walked back to where I'd parked the car. I rummaged around for some dry clothes, turned the heating up high, and tried to catch a few extra hours of sleep. Spending the rest of the week in the car wasn't sustainable, let alone enjoyable. I didn't have much cash, and if I wanted to get back home, I couldn't exactly afford to waste fuel on heating. I had a few options. I could turn the car around and drive 3.5 hours back home. I'd only been gone one night. Maybe I could make it back before anyone really got worried. But what then? Back to the mind-numbing retail 9 to 5 until I moved away and committed to endless studying? I needed to keep moving, even for just a little while. If I drove fast enough, the future wouldn't get me. I revised the little to-do list I'd made. If the weather stayed the way it was, which according to my phone it intended to, exploring the store and the Kerrang were off the table, let alone the Spar Cave, which risked a night spent underground as a result of poor planning. Turning around would have been the wise thing to do, but wiseness was long gone from me. Instead, I stopped at the nearest bookstore and picked up a bothy map of Skye. It would be perfect: free lodgings, a scenic drive, and an hour hike to the top of Ruva Hunnish, where the unmanned former lookout would be waiting to receive me. All I had to do was plug the destination into my GPS. Just before Ruva, you pass through the abandoned village of Duntlin. There's a castle hidden there, a former monolith that should have towered over the landscape. Once upon a time, members of the Highland nobility stayed here. It was not uncommon for these people to take in travellers, usually those from local villages heading towards the sea to give their praises to the divinities they believed to be there. They say that one day, a stranger traipsed his way into the castle. He was malnourished, the skin falling around his bones like loose clothes, like something he'd put on that was just a little unfitting for him. When welcomed in by the family, he tucked into his serving of bread and meats like a madman, his eyes empty, according to one of the servant girls. No rage, no sadness, no humility, no person behind them. Just grey pearls which burned into her when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd left early that evening with a somewhat exaggerated complaint of lightheadedness, and when she returned to work the next morning, every inhabitant of the castle was missing. The only sign that life had ever existed here was a fractured segment of a jawbone belonging to the patriarch of the house, identified by the 2 silver teeth perched in it. Small pieces of flesh still clinging to the edges. They say something still lurked around these parts, be it the vengeful spirits of the family or the stranger that seemed to wipe them off the face of the earth. Looking about the castle, it was scarcely more than rubble. Half-broken walls housed nothing but a few stairs, which stretched into the air and led to nothing at all. It felt like staring down a corpse. I forced my eyes away from the sight, and screw-faced and bleary-eyed, began to make my way up the mountain. Though the winds were no less ferocious, nor the rain more forgiving, the view that greeted me when I reached the top was something unreal. The sea stretched on for what looked like forever, the sun slicing its way through truly angry clouds and reflecting in the water. The bothy stood daintily against the wild scenery behind it, and the rawness of it all for some strange reason made me want to cry. I walked past the bothy, dropping my bag in a covered corner to prevent it getting soaked any further, and let my feet carry me as close to the edge of the cliff as I dared. The sea roared below me, its violent waves like sirens seeming to draw me closer, but I let my tired legs carefully lower me to the ground, and laid down my back, taking in the rush of everything around me. I was grinning at the shape of the clouds in the sky, observing the space where the grey transitions into noir, when a voice travelled over the wind, quiet yet clear as day. "Are you quite well, missus?" I tilted my head to the voice. The foggy, sideways image of him made no sense to me, so I righted myself and tried to clear the rain out of my eyes to look at him more clearly. Upright, he still made very little sense to me. He stood about 10 meters away, donned in something closer to hunting than hiking gear, but not that of deer hunters you find occasionally in the cairngorms. No, this man was dressed in a neat plaid shirt under a heavy green jacket, the expensive-looking kind. His leather shoes, bewilderingly, were still shining, the sun gleaming off them like diamonds. There didn't seem to be a speck of dirt nor damp on him, even though he was standing in the same rain as me. I looked at him and I just knew. This is a man who hunts foxes. "Yeah," I shouted back, just admiring the view. "You can surely do that from inside?" he suggested, a coaxing tone to his cadence. English, I realized. It was clear that not following him inside wasn't really an option. It was 4 in the afternoon by this point, the weather wasn't getting any better. It was going to be a long night. The bothy was so packed with people to the point that when I pushed the door open, I knocked the shoes of a man who'd apparently chosen the hallway as his place of rest for the evening. He awkwardly shuffled out of the way in order to let me in, glaring at me over his book. To my left was what in a normal situation would be a 2-person bedroom with a bunk bed. On the top sat a young couple chatting over cups of coffee. The bottom bunk was claimed by a utilitarian canvas bag with a little Union Jack patch sewed onto it, which I guessed belonged to the foxhunter. The rest of the floor was left unseen by the sleeping bags of a gaggle of Italian hikers huddled over a game of cards, oblivious to my presence. The room on the right, which would have acted as an old lookout, was much the same, though the rest of the tents had abandoned their sleeping spots instead to sit by the massive window, watching the already biblical storm grow worse by the minute. A few turned around to smile and say hello. I stumbled my way into the unclaimed corner of the room right by the hallway door to finally set down my things. The foxhunter came over and leaned against the doorframe. "Seems you and I are the only Brits here," he said. "We ought to stick together." I awkwardly smiled at him. I thought of his fancy accent, how the vowels seemed stretched large enough to swallow you whole, thought of his hunting coat and his uncanny tidiness, and I thought that we couldn't be any less alike. We were in this for the long run, though, and there was no point in not humouring him. He was a little creepy, but seemed mostly harmless. The evening dragged on, mostly spent journaling, reading, or listening to the foxhunter disrupt and divert every single conversation for the rest of the night. No matter the situation, he always had some sort of anecdote. He was an expert in just about everything from hiking through the Alps, to the study of politics at university, to the road laws in the UK in comparison to mainland Europe. It was 8 by this point, and most of us were tucked into our sleeping bags, chatting over cups of tea or hot chocolate, all opposed to the foxhunter, who was chewing on a fat cigar that he insisted he couldn't smoke outside, the ash of it falling onto my sleeping bag from where he was still hovering over me. "You know," started one of the Italian girls, "the whole time we've been here, we've hardly heard anyone speak the Scottish language." "Ah," the foxhunter cut in, "that would be Celtic. It's a dead language, for the better, to be honest." "How so?" "Well, I'm sure you've heard the accent at the very least while you've been here. The Scots are so harshly spoken. A couple schools still teach Celtic here and there, but frankly it's a waste of time and taxpayer money. What's the point in teaching children such a useless skill? It speaks of an ancient barbaric culture, cavemen. That's the Highlands right the way down. A few tenants leaned over to the fox hunter, eyes wide and curious like children at a campfire, waiting patiently for him to elaborate. He looked around, and a small grin grew on his face. The Highland clans were a particular kind of evil, you see. They invaded English settlements in the middle of the night, stealing the livestock, burning down homes, killing men, women, children. Entire bloodlines lost. It was a bleak period of English history. Savages. Savages, all of them. What about what the English did to the Scots? The tenants turned to me, surprised by my voice breaking the fox hunter's carefully curated tension. It was the first I'd really spoken that night, and I'd even surprised myself. I craned my neck up to the fox hunter, only to find him staring wide and blank at me. What about it? He asked, that unnerving softness back in his voice. Political debate is a ghastly way to make conversation with a stranger. This was a bad idea, but the words seemed to spill out of me. I mean, the Scots were invading their own land that the English had occupied. That livestock belonged to them before the army stole them. The Scots may have attacked the villages, but the king and his army tried to exterminate the Scottish people entirely. The English language wasn't simply a nicer-sounding alternative to Gaelic. It pillaged and raped its way through Scotland until Gaelic was illegalized. That is the reason you do not hear it anymore. The fact that there still exist schools today dedicated to it is a miracle. The room is quiet for a little while, only for the rain hitting the windows, until one of the Italian girls giggles awkwardly, dispelling the tension. "Well, we best be careful not to cross you rowdy Highlanders." The other tenants laughed with her, moving on to share their own experience of the locals on Skye. A little embarrassed, I forced a chuckle. The fox hunter didn't. Instead, he looked down at me intently. He spoke lowly, like only I was supposed to hear. "Did you drive here?" I did. Of course I did. He must have seen my car keys attached by a clip at my waist. I clutched them just to be sure they're there. "Yes," I answered weakly. "When are you traveling home tomorrow?" As early as possible. The moment the sun tries to break through that storm, I'm gone. I don't know. Noonish, maybe? I need a lift. I hitchhiked my way out here. I'm headed south. You'll take me with you? I felt tears brim up in my eyes. I could do nothing but pointlessly open and shut my mouth like some stupid fish, hoping for words which refused to come. I want to tell him no. It's the kind of question designed so that you can't exactly say no. "Tell me by morning," he declared, smiling mirthlessly before walking away. I took some time to think of the logistics of trying to hike down the hill right then and there, of making it to my car and begging the nearest hostel to take me in. I didn't care if they didn't have a room. I was prepared to sleep on their lobby floor, so long as it put a locked door between me and this man. But it was starting to grow dark outside. My phone, which I had been foolishly using as a flashlight, was nearly dead, and even with very little service, I wanted at least some chance to call for help, just in case. I wouldn't have much luck getting down this steep, unfamiliar hike, and this wasn't even to mention just how exhausted I was from the rocky night of sleep from the evening prior. I just had to commit. Sleep would come easily to me. I'd be gone at the first sight of sunlight tomorrow, quick hike down the hill. I'd drive away, I'd continue the rest of my trip. The morning didn't go that way. I waked to a strange sound, something like sawing. No, that isn't right. Something was being cut, but it wasn't wood. Snip, snip, that's what I'm hearing. Someone is cutting something, the sound interrupted by bouts of wet, ragged breath. My eyes opened, just a little at first, catching the bright moonlight that is shining diligently through the pitch-black clouds outside. I calmly followed the path of light, the light reflecting brightly in the fox hunter's glassy, dead eyes, the light reflecting brightly of the small hunting knife he is using to cut open the bottom of my sleeping bag. Dirty hands pull clumsily at the seams he's torn. His heavy, rancid breath settles over my face. Light reflecting brightly off his long, long teeth. The air smells like blood. Ancient mud, flesh, fire, bone, and so much blood. He smells like he's devoured history. His jaw is hung wider than anything that I have ever seen. I don't think. I don't even scream. I just force my feet into the fox hunter's jaw as hard as possible. He falls on top of the sleeper opposite me. I fight with the zipper of my sleeping bag until I'm out, that I'm running. I stomp unthinking on top of the man sleeping by the door, throwing the door open as wide as I can and sprinting out into the dark with my socked feet, faster than I think I've ever run in my life. But I'm not really running. It feels more like falling very fast through the air. Right the way down, my shins slam into boulders and my ankles begin to fail me after one too many hard falls, feet stuck in the possessive mud of the hill. At one point I stumble into a shallow ditch and manage to lose a few nails, clawing myself out of the sludge, clawing myself off of the broken tree root which has dug its way into my gut. Despite all this, the pain is gone from me. I just keep running until I'm hurtling towards my car, hands shaking as I clumsily unlock the door. Even then, I don't stop. I start the Fiat and crush my battered foot into the accelerator, driving 30 over the limit until I find society once more. I stumble towards the first house I see, and when its inhabitants come to the door, I ask frantically for somebody to call an ambulance. When I woke next, I was at Broadford Hospital, met with nothing but the clothes on my back, 2 broken ankles, 8 stitches in my stomach, and the tear-stricken face of my terrified mother looking down at me. She moved to brush my hair back from my face with achingly gentle hands that have shown me nothing but kindness, and I flinched hard enough to tear the stitches in my abdomen. Sense memory is a funny thing. In one version of events, I can clearly hear that ragged breathing following me down the hill, the stomp of boots slamming into the mud just at my heels. In another, there is nothing but the wind, firing past my ears. If I'd paid more attention to my surroundings, I wonder if I would have noticed the uncanny silence of the lookout before I ran, that the person the fox hunter fell on top of never made a noise, or that the man I trampled by the door made no sound of protest but a dull, wet squelch as my foot sank into the spot where his rib cage should be. I would have noticed the blood which covered the bothy floor, covered the fox hunter's mouth. Or maybe it was all some horrible dream. I try to convince myself it was. I rarely succeed. But I got what I wanted. I'm writing poems again. They speak almost singularly of something more than a man on a mountain, some awful bloated thing that stretches out for miles, for years, something older than time itself, something infinitely hungrier.